it's a particularly good time to think about our hope. And the reason I say that is because it's the end of the year and the start of a new year, and people are often making promises about what they're going to do during the year. But also it gives us cause to think about the state of the world, perhaps. You know, people do a summary of all the things that have happened in 2018 or the situation in the world. And to talk about our hope provides some relief from all the problems that we see in the world around us. And I thought I'd just start by thinking about this question of why we would need to have a discussion like we're having tonight. And really what I want to do is use a few of these headings to think about why it is that the world needs hope. Not just me and not just you, but the world as a whole. Why does it need hope? And in a sense, you know, why is it hopeless? You just look at some of those things that I've listed there. Like globally, I said an arms race. Well, just in the last week or two, there have been a few things about the arms race that cause people to put their head in their hands. You know, the Cold War's been and gone, and people have tended to think that the nuclear threat has gone, and then there's North Korea, and they're worried about a nuclear threat again. And that's sort of calmed down. North Korea, South Korea, they're all talking happily. You know, maybe that'll all get resolved. And then we find that Russia has tested some hypersonic missile that can reach the US in just a matter of an hour or two and quickly knock out the major cities of the US before they've even had time to get out of bed, perhaps. Far less time to, you know, get themselves ready for a nuclear strike. And then you read, just this week, that China has been seen with one of its warships, and on the front of its warship it has something called a hypersonic railgun. Hypersonic because that's how fast the missile that shoots out of this gun goes, faster than the speed of sound. But also it's a railgun, and it's using totally new technology to send missiles faster and further than they have before. So a ship like this can be sinking a ship at 200 kilometres distant in the space of just a few minutes. That's how long it takes this missile to go a few hundred kilometres. For the last however long or mankind has been using missiles on ships that are shot with explosives and all sorts of technical challenges to try and manage that and make them go faster, but there are lots of limits. And the more explosives you have on a ship, the more vulnerable the ship is to being attacked, and you know, everybody goes up with the ship if you've got too many explosives in it. So there are new threats in the global arms race that we perhaps didn't think about a year ago. And when you've got China and the US having this argy-bargy, and Russia and the US having another one, and you know, these sorts of threats going on in the Taiwan Strait or in the South China Sea, people get worried about these things. And in a sense, so they should, because how do you get countries that are so far apart as China and the US to ever see sense? They just are on totally different agendas. They don't even seem to agree on anything much at all. So global conflict and war continues. And there's been wars continuing all over the place. People are dying in their thousands in Africa still from wars, and elsewhere in the world as well. And there's these little hotspots, you know. India just building a new bridge way up in the north into the various little states that it has way up in the north, so that it can get its trains up there faster and it can get its troops up there faster if it thinks it's got a problem on its border with, I think, China. You know, these are all the things that are in the world that people are thinking about. And then there's food security. You know, there's famine and problems with food in large parts of the world. Hundreds of thousands and millions of children who are not getting 3 meals a day, sometimes not even getting enough food to really survive on. And there are great threats to this. You know, our food security is at risk from all sorts of diseases and natural disasters that can cause a lot of havoc in countries. And we've seen this in the Pacific region, for instance, at a small level, but it can get worse. These are problems that man is having great difficulty solving. There's people like there's millions of people in India without secure water. You know, they certainly don't have water piped to their home. They might have to walk kilometres to get it. They might have to walk kilometres and then climb down a well and lift up a bucket of murky water and then somehow perhaps filter that if they're lucky. And these sorts of issues also exist right across the developed world. But of course, everybody seems to be worried about global warming and climate change. You know, they forget all the problems that we've got in society, but they're very worried about global warming and climate change and worried about what effect this will have on our lifestyle and perhaps our food production and whether we'll have enough water to keep Adelaide going or whatever it might happen to be. This is not something man has any real solutions for. You can have all the summits and all the world politicians agreeing to reach targets, but when you actually look at what targets they're reaching, they're only targets that would allow this global warming to continue, if you believe the scientists. And then there's habitat loss. You've got whole heaps of forests being cut down to plant, you know, perhaps crop trees of some sort, like palms for palm oil and such things. And what that's doing is just affecting global climate as well. We've got issues in our oceans. Everybody is worried about ocean conservation issues. You know, there might be a problem in the Great Barrier Reef because of, you know, some port that they decide to build there or whatever it might happen to be. Or there's a big rubbish dump in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And suddenly, you know, everybody's focused on all the plastic bags floating around the ocean. And there's pollution. Just today, I saw an article about the serious air pollution in Delhi. But I go to India and to China quite a bit. And it doesn't really matter what city you go to. There are serious problems of air pollution that are causing people to die constantly. And what is going to be done about it? People in India all want a car. They all want to have, you know, the freedom to get around, like people in China. In China, at least, they're building lots of new cars and they've got lots of wide expressways and roadways that they're building, infrastructure they're building, but it doesn't change the situation that some of their cities are the most polluted in the world and extremely dangerous almost to walk around in during the day. They suggest you keep inside. And then there's urban sprawl. You know, you look at China, I see these pictures of cities in China that just 5 or 6 years ago just looked like a little spot. And now they're huge, you know, 1 million people, as big as Adelaide, in just the space of a few years. And you think, you know, what's happening there? Well, you know, it's like there's these big factories and they're building all sorts of big things and they need a lot of workers. And so they're bringing all these people from the rural areas into the cities. It's happening rapidly in China, but it's happened throughout our society over the last, or since the turn of industrialization. But they're big, insurmountable issues that nobody really seems to get on top of. But they seem much more tractable issues that we could really handle than some of the societal issues, like inequality. You know, like India's another case, like in Mumbai, where you've got the Ambanis who have a family home of, you know, 17 stories with room for 355 cars and 3 helicopters, and you know, it's towering over the slums of Mumbai, where literally more than 1 million people and families live without running water in sort of tenement houses that have all been jerry-rigged and built out of bits of offcuts of materials from all sorts of other things. And they don't have sewerage. They don't have toilets to go to. The toilets they have are dry toilets that have to be cleaned out by the lower castes of society. It's just a terrible situation. But I mean, we think that we're like that in Australia, but we're not like that in Australia. But actually, we have third world conditions in our own country. You only have to go into some of the Aboriginal communities in Australia, and it is not markedly different. There's rubbish everywhere. You've got people sitting around in rubbish just the same way as you do in India or Pakistan or some of the rural areas in China. So it's a very difficult subject to try and get your head around, because how does society suddenly change to recognise all this inequality when you've got all these rich people who don't want to give up what they've got, and you've got society who doesn't even know what's happening within their own society to vote politicians in and support them to make the changes? They're not going to pay the money that's needed to provide jobs and education and housing and health that all work together to ensure there is no inequality. Man just doesn't have solutions for these things. And we shouldn't think that, here we're living in a very comfortable situation, but there are huge proportions of the world, people in the world, that suffer from this inequality and exploitation. I don't just mean, they're less well off. These are people who are dying earlier. Their children have average life expectancies of 15 years in some cases, and they're not getting education. And so this cycle continues, nothing changes, and in fact, some societies are set up to need those sort of people to continue to operate the way they work. But then individually, I was reading that something like 55% of teenagers, I think girls between 12 and 14, 55% of teenagers said that the number one problem they wanted their parent to be aware of was anxiety and stress. This is 12 to 14-year-olds. So society's problems impact on children, and they impact on teenagers in particular. And what's happening with the growth in the use of technology, it's doing nothing to improve the situation. But fundamentally, there's a problem, and that is that humans are mortal, frail people, and easily hit with diseases, be they diseases that come from stress and post-traumatic stress disorder and all those sorts of things, or diseases that come from viruses and bacteria and those sort of things that suddenly society's not so well set up to manage. And the result of that is suffering. And there's extreme suffering throughout the world, and right down to our own individual circumstances. And it's hard to find people in the world around us who aren't touched by this from time to time. And so here we are at the start of 2019. So if people are going to talk to us about the sort of things that they're thinking about, it doesn't matter whether it's about global warming or it's about inequality. It doesn't matter if it's about suffering in their family or if it's about, global suffering that's happening to girls in Africa, or whatever their concern might be. Actually, the world needs a hope, and the Bible has a solution. Without hope, what we find is that the fight for resources leads to war, it leads to oppression, it leads to death, and it leads to destruction. It's happened throughout the history of mankind. Inequality. It feeds terrorism. What's that generate? It generates fear. That fear generates stresses and anxieties in the part of the population. Suddenly, they're afraid to go to China because the US government has issued some travel warning saying that, you shouldn't go to China because there's some, threat that you might get arrested there, like a couple of US citizens have. Or the fear of terrorism. We've got to put bollards in all our major cities because we're fearful that someone will drive a car down the mall or the footpaths. And global warming. There just isn't the moral courage of politicians as a whole across the world to make a decision and to get on and actually make those changes. We have a very fragile society. Half the world might well be democratic, but it can't use that democratic power to actually achieve outcomes because we have these cycles of 3 and 5 years for politicians. They have no long-term interests. They just want to keep in power. Famine and starvation. These are things that are constant cyclical things that keep coming up. Man doesn't have a solution to stop it. The El Niños, they just keep coming, and they have an effect on huge populations. And societally, it's the same sort of thing. Politicians lack moral courage, but they also are not upstanding moral figures who have any sort of claim to moral leadership. And so we have politicians who are standing down all the time because of corruption or because of misappropriation of money or, doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So we have a fragile society because we don't have any leadership that's capable of pulling this together. And this leads to disharmony and distrust within society. We've got the police in St Kilda in Melbourne trying to keep apart the, people who are interested in who would like to have more immigrants from the people who think we shouldn't have more immigrants. It just spreads this sort of lawlessness and fear. And exploitation leads to these sort of problems that keep recurring generation after generation. You ask educators out at Manopara about the low socioeconomic families that they're dealing with, and they find that 2, 3, and 4 generations of the family have never had a job. And if they haven't had a job, they've always been living in underprivileged housing and, never able to actually extract themselves from these problems. And then individually, mortality and suffering can come on anyone, anytime. The diseases that confront society can affect a child, or they can affect an adult who one day they think they're perfectly healthy and the next day they can be struck down with a disease. And so this leads to anxiety and mental illness and more fear about health. We find people who are just totally fearful about their own health, wanting to, don masks and go around with gloves on in case they might catch a disease. And similarly, at an individual level, there isn't spiritual leadership that can help direct people with good morals and help them build structure to their lives. And when we think about what spiritual leaders we have, well, we've got problems with spiritual leaders all over the world. They are just trying to impress. They're trying to be populist and make sure that people keep coming in the doors of their churches. They don't have any moral authority because actually they're not very moral people anyway. And so people are increasingly disinterested in the Bible, and there is, on the flip side, this sort of increase in fundamentalism that's leading to sort of radicalism in quite a number of different areas, not just Islamic fundamentalism, but also, fundamentalism in other areas. And the political leaders are just nationalistic. That's not going to change, is it? Xi Jinping is not going to look after the interests of the US. He's got, his billions in China that he needs to look after, and China's interests come before anything else. And Donald Trump, certainly America, comes first. So, when we have these problems, they're just going to keep going, continue on. But there is hope in the Bible. We can trust the Bible. We don't have to be fearful. It is God's word. It's verified by Bible prophecy, by archaeology. It is internally consistent, as we would expect a book from an all-knowing divine being to be. And it contains God's power to save. We can trust it. And it provides a very comprehensive picture of how we've got to be in the situation we're in now. We can understand why the world is like it is now. Indeed, the Bible even tells us that men's hearts now will be failing them for fear, for looking after the things that are coming on the earth. And that sort of summarizes the situation right at the moment. It describes the introduction of sin into the world and the consequences of sin and the human nature, the effect on human nature, and all of those things together provide the basis that has led man to be in the situation that he's in now. But it also has a hope, a comprehensive solution, not something that's just trying to, reduce the amount of carbon emissions, or not something that's just trying to increase the health outcomes for Aboriginal children, or not something that's just trying to provide water to, these 60,000 people here that don't have it. It's a comprehensive solution that crosses worldwide boundaries, that pulls down the problems that man has established. Partisanship, nationalism, these sort of things, and provides a promise that God will send his Son as Saviour of all mankind, and an offer for all mankind to follow him. So we look tonight at Psalm 72, and this provides a word picture for us of the hope of the Bible. Our hope, the world's hope, your hope, my hope. And there are three aspects of the solution that it highlights for us. First of all, that God's Son is King. Secondly, the new world values that will be established and how the earth will be changed. So if we just have a look at what we had read for us tonight, it begins in verse 1. Give the king thy judgments, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son. And this is pointing to somebody who would be the seed of David, the king of Israel. So he'd be a descendant of David, but he's established by God. Give the king thy judgments, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son. Righteousness is not something that's talked about in the world today. Righteousness is that innate quality of the man that is free from sin, free from making mistakes of bias or sinning against one person or other. And that's why this man that is promised in this psalm will judge thy people with righteousness and thy poor with judgment. What happens to the poor today? They can't afford to go to court. The court system's there. It's allegedly accessible to all, but it's established with these structures that need money. You've got to pay lawyers to get justice and judgment. But now, God's saying there's a time coming when thy people will be judged with righteousness and the poor with judgment. The next verse says, thy mountains shall bring peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. And I said this is a word picture. The mountains, it's not talking about, Mount Lofty or, some other Mount Kilimanjaro. No, mountains don't bring peace, do they? Mountains is a poetic term. It's referring to the leaders of the time, the leaders that will be established as part of the kingdom that is established on earth, as part of the new world values. These mountains, the rulers, will suddenly be, or differently, be bringing peace to the people, and the little hills by righteousness. It doesn't happen today, does it? You don't find the bureaucrats in Canberra bringing peace to the people. Actually, they're making as many problems as they're solving. And they're certainly not doing it by righteousness. And if you then extend that out to the bureaucrats in China or India or the USA, they're all rotten to the core. They're all interested in looking after their own interests first and foremost. But now, the values of this kingdom are peace and righteousness. And not only will he judge the poor of the people in verse 4, like we'd read in verse 2, but he will save the children of the needy and break in pieces the oppressor. So the children of the needy today have almost no options. In India, there's some phenomenal number of millions, 17 million children of families who earn less than 50 cents a day. So think about that, 17 million children with less than 50 cents a day. That's children of the needy. I mean, we have it in our society too. We have children of the needy because these children's parents are stuck with alcohol or substance abuse. And so they have no money and the children get left. But now, he shall save the children of the needy and will break in pieces the oppressor. So instead of justice being slow and clumsy and missing out large segments of a criminal society, now the oppressor will be broken in pieces. And a bit more about the values of the kingdom. They shall fear thee. Who's the thee? It's God. You look at the first verse, give the king thy judgments, O God, and now they shall fear thee as long as the sun and moon endure. So people will fear, that means to respect God, as long as the sun and moon endure throughout all generations. This is a kingdom where God is central, where respecting God is first and foremost a value of the kingdom. Everybody respects God. But not only do they respect God, they will be doing it throughout all generations. And then it speaks of the king and says, he shall come down like rain upon the mown grass and showers that water the earth. This is another word picture of the beautiful blessings that flow from this ruler, totally different to the rulers that we have today. People will feel like it's been a refreshing shower, the blessings that they have received. And in his days shall the righteous flourish. People who do the right thing certainly don't flourish today. and abundance of peace as long as the moon endureth. So once again, not only does this kingdom have these values, but they will be established forever. And it's a worldwide kingdom. We see in verse 8, he will have dominion from sea to sea and from the river unto the ends of the earth, a description of the breadth of this kingdom. And they that dwell in the wilderness will bow before him. So the nations of the wilderness will bow before him, and his enemies shall lick the dust. So his enemies will come to see they need to respect him as well. The kings of Tarshish and of the isles will bring presents, and the kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. So the rulers of the earth will be coming to give gifts unto this king and bring presents. And all kings will fall down before him. They will all serve him. And this ruler will be capable of ruling all nations. Nationalistic interests won't feature anymore. We read in verse 14 that he will save the souls of the needy and redeem their soul from deceit and violence, and precious shall their blood be in his sight. And where we have lawless countries like in South America or parts of Africa, no longer will those sort of things be going on anymore. The needy will be saved from deceit and violence. In verse 16, there shall be an handful of corn in the earth upon the top of the mountains. You know, you don't grow corn on the top of the mountains, but now corn will be there in abundance, in handfuls. The fruit thereof shall shake like Lebanon. Lebanon, these great big cedar trees. And the fruit on the top of the mountains would be shaking like that. It will be going backwards and forwards as the wind blows. There will be so much of it. And then an interesting comment. They of the city shall flourish like grass of the earth. And when we talked about urbanization and the effect of that, you know, its effect on exploitation, on crime, you know, these are terrible things, but pollution and all sorts of other things as well. But now we've got this picture that they of the city will be flourishing like grass of the earth. There will be a change. The world won't be centered around these big metropolises that breed all of these problems. But these people who are in the cities will be flourishing like grass of the earth. And his name shall endure forever. So his name, the things he stands for, the values of the kingdom, they won't change with every new ruler. They will endure forever. And all men will be blessed in him. They will be happy in him. And they will call him blessed. So they will call him happy and respect this ruler for the things that he does. And then we're left with these 3 verses. Blessed be the Lord God, the God of Israel, who only doeth wondrous things. This is the person who's writing this psalm, giving praise to God who will bring it about. And blessed be his glorious name forever. And then finally, let the whole earth be filled with his glory. This is the picture, the hope of the Bible. I'd like to finish by looking at Isaiah 55. Because Isaiah 55 is the invitation to partake of this hope. It says, Ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters, and he that hath no money, come ye buy and eat, yea, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Wherefore do you spend money for that which is not bread, and your labour for that which satisfieth not? Hearken diligently, listen diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your soul delight itself in fatness. This is another word picture, but it's an invitation. All those problems of the world we talked about, the problems that people talk about from day to day, this is people thirsting for hope. They really want us to drink up that hope. They just don't know where to turn. They pay money. They pay money for things they think will make them happy. But no, this is something that doesn't take money. Come, buy wine and eat. Buy and eat, even if you don't have money. Buy wine and milk without money and without price. And he's talking about the water of life that is the Word of God, that is the great hope that is contained in it. And the bread of life, another description of the Bible. And he says, incline your ear and come unto me. Hear, and your soul shall live. So there's a need to listen to this hope and to hearken. That means to respond to it. And your soul will live. So instead of being worried about the next disease we might catch, or the impact of the disease and mortality that we have, no, the invitation is there to hear, and our soul will live. And not just live, he says, I will make an everlasting covenant with you, even the sure mercies of David. A covenant, it's a promise. God will make an everlasting promise with us. And the sure mercies of David. And when he says the mercies of David, he's talking about the fact that David was given promises and he's dead, and God has promised to raise him from the dead, and that is the sure mercies of David. So even if we die in this life, this hope for the world is something we can still participate in. In verse 5, behold, thou shalt call a nation that thou knowest not, and nations that knew not thee shall run unto thee because of the Lord thy God. Now he's talking to the Jewish people, and he's saying that this hope, which was given to King David of Israel, applies to all the nations, all the people. In verse 4, he says he would be a leader and a commander to all the nations, or all the peoples. And then in verse 6, the invitation, seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. And let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. It's a very personal invitation. It's an individual invitation for us each to partake of. We all need to realize the human nature that we have, and the effect of sin in our own lives. And God is saying, let's forsake that way and forsake those unrighteous thoughts and return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon us, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. That's his invitation. That's his promise. It is God's solution. It's God's solution to the world's problems at a global level, at society's level, but most importantly, it's a solution to our problems from day to day. It's a solution to our problem, the problems we have of human nature, whatever they might be, and mortality eventually that will take us all at some stage or other. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near.